All right. So welcome everybody. So thanks a lot for being here. So this is Dan Bar-Sever's PhD defense. So just a few words before Dan actually starts and going on with this presentation is that, well, actually Dan here is what used to be my first PhD student and still is my first PhD student at UC Irvine. And so he joined me from electrical engineering, also graduated from the university. And so at first when he joined, we gave him a project. What was it? I think it was about uncertainty with spiking neural networks.
Yeah. Well, first I flailed around for like almost a year, like on facial recognition and facial expression analysis, and then we try, and then I tried Bayesian surprise is what I worked on.
That's right. That's right. I forgot the face recognition part. And so we noticed that wasn't. I'm not sure what happened, but it was just let's find something that you actually enjoy doing. And so Dan came to me and said, "Look, I'd love to do." To work in language and learn more about basically lie detection and fake news, etc. I said, well, that's a fantastic subject, but I know very little about this, so you're going to be on your own. And so since then, so Dan has, in that respect, has done a really great job in really driving his own research. Most of the things that he'll be talking to you about today was really driven by his own interests, and he really found, I think, very creative ways of probing fake news and lies in text and creating experiments for this, which I thought was at least I found very nice to listen to and participate in. So with that, but before I let Dan actually take this in, I'm just going to explain the procedure here. We are first going to have Dan's presentation for about 45 minutes. It's up to Dan if he wants to take questions during that presentation or not. At the end of this presentation, we'll have a discussion which will be open to the public, to all of us. I'll first invite some questions from the public itself and then from the committee members. After this, Dan will open a breakout room for us committee members, which is myself, Mark Stivers, and Samir Singh here. We'll go discuss there and hopefully announce the good news. Okay, so I think that's all I had to say. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. There you go. All right, can everyone see this correctly? All good? All right. Thank you for coming to my defense, everybody. I'm very excited to share my work with you. So we deal with a lot of deception, especially deceptive text. It's all around us. Like this guy, Earnburner here. He's posted a review on TripAdvisor, which is not true. This is a fake review, and this is something that even though it sounds silly, it's something that affects all of us directly. Things like fake reviews affect our financial decisions. When we go and buy products, we look at online reviews. We base political decisions on what we read in the news, and we make everyday decisions based on what we read in social media, and all of this affects our thought processes. So it's actually become very important to be able to understand deception in text, but it's a very hard task. A lot of the cues that you get with physical deception don't exist in text, and it's not nearly as well understood or well studied. So I have generated 3 interrelated projects that try to sort of probe into and understand deceptive text. So in project 1, I built a new state-of-the-art classifier based out of this network called BERT, and then I play around with the input to BERT to see what parts of that input are very important for its classifications. And I also make a new BERT-based network that makes up my own samples. But speaking of making my own samples, project 2 is all about the creation of a new corpus to fix a couple of problems that I find in existing corpora. So this is a new data set of deceptive text that I call the motivated deception corpus, so-called because the people in it are very motivated to make their lie very convincing, because I turn the process into a game. And finally, in project 3, I move into the side of human judgment of deceptive text. This is where I use Amazon Mechanical Turk and crowdsourcing to take that corpus that I made before and show them to lots of other people and see what they consider to be deceptive. All right, so diving into project 1. So in this one, I'm using a network that is based on something called BERT. BERT is this extremely powerful, fairly recently developed neural network based on something called transformers, which are these attention-based networks that are very highly used in language applications. And BERT is very powerful and flexible because it can extract contextual information from its inputs. And what I'll be using as the data set for BERT in this project is called the OTT Deceptive Opinion Spam data set, which is a set of fake and true hotel reviews. Half of them are sourced from TripAdvisor, and the other half are sourced from Amazon Mechanical Turk. Those are the deceptive reviews. So first, I have to make a classifier that works really well. It needs to be able to tell the difference between a fake and a true review. So I played around with several different network architectures, and through trial and error, this is the one that did the best. This is the classifier that I made, which is going to carry through into every other project that I've done so far. And it did really well. It broke state of the art. It was very, very good at telling the difference between truthful and deceptive text, which is not an easy task. But it's not enough to just have a network that is able to tell the difference. We need to be able to get that network to tell us something about the difference. So this starts what I call my ablation studies. So this is where I wipe out parts of the input or change parts of the input to see how it affects BERT. So the first ablation is called the word-based, and I'm going to walk you through basically what I do and how I ablate a piece of text. So first I have this potential review, but right now this is unreadable to BERT. So first I tokenize it. I break it up into individual tokens, which are the words, the punctuation, and all the different parts of words. These are all words that these words have a specific vocabulary token in BERT. Then I tag each token by its part of speech. I use the Natural Language Toolkit part of speech tagger to do this. And then I will isolate a specific part of speech, let's say the determiners. So I'll take every token that was marked with that part of speech, and I will replace it with a mask token. A mask token is a special token for BERT that tells it that there's a word here, but we're not going to tell you what it is. So it has to infer that from context. So the question was, after eliminating specific parts of speech, which caused the highest drop in BERT's accuracy? Which one was giving it the most information? And the answer was variable. By far, the biggest effect was singular nouns. But this isn't quite enough, because language, as we know, has something of a noun bias. There's a lot of nouns in everyday language, so removing them can just make the sentence less comprehensible overall. So this might not be just because nouns are informative, but rather because it can't really understand it. So we move from words into sentence-based ablation. So in this case, instead of taking individual words or types of words, I go through a paragraph of a review, and I isolate a single sentence. I do this for every sentence in the paragraph, and I replace that entire sentence with mask tokens. Now, if the classifier had previously classified this paragraph correctly, either a true review as true or a false review as false, and then this sentence causes it to flip classifications, that means that sentence was really important to the original classification. So this is what I call a swing sentence. So after isolating these swing sentences, I did part of speech analysis on them to see what kind of things were especially prominent. And what I found was that in general, there's the means vary, but interestingly, the standard deviations of the deceptive sentences tended to be lower across the board. But so we got some sentences that they're considered highly truthful and highly deceptive, but we want to know what can Bert think about? What does Bert think of when it thinks of a deceptive or truthful sentence? So for that, I decided to make my own samples using Bert. So this is something called a generative adversarial network, or a GAN. And this where we have the discriminator, which is the original classifier, and a generator. So the generator takes a random input and generates its own sample. It presents that sample along with real samples to the discriminator, which has to tell the difference between a real sample and a generated sample. And I do this for both truthful and deceptive text. So we have real truthful versus generated truthful, and real deceptive versus generated deceptive. And I refer to this network as the generator of realistic obfuscation under combative honesty, or Grouch. So what did Grouch do? This is the kind of sentence that Grouch made. And if you can tell the difference between them, very good. You are better at this than I am. But interestingly, the Bert classifier can tell the difference. If you present these generated sentences to the classifier that has only been trained on the aught data set, it can still tell the difference. So that makes Grouch pretty cool. Then I did the same part of speech analysis on the generated sentences that I did the deceptive sentences, and there's some differences, but there's also a few similarities. For the part of speeches that are above trivial mean, the standard deviations are still lower. So overall, this indicates to me that when we have a very important proof of concept, there is a difference between deceptive and truthful text. That was one of the points of this project. We need to establish this basic truth that there is in fact a distinguishable difference between what makes something truthful and what makes something deceptive. Also, what this also indicates to me is that because the deceptive answers are a bit more consistent, that there's a marker that indicates deception that is not necessarily there for something that's truthful, or at least between a Mechanical Turk and between TripAdvisor. Because see, there's a bit of an issue that I had with the aught data set and with a lot of data sets like it, which is that there's really not a lot of impetus for the people who make the data to really be effortful about it. When you put something on Mechanical Turk, you say, hey, please write me a review of a hotel that you've never been to, and they'll do it and they'll get their money, and that's it. There's no other real impetus to really make the lie convincing, which is what real world deception is like. The real world deception has a goal. They want you to buy this product. They want you to believe their story. They put effort into making it convincing. So how do I replicate that? So the answer is by turning it into a game, by turning my subjects into gamers. And that brings us into my second project, which is the motivated deception corpus. This is where I have my subjects play the party game Two Truths and a Lie. You might have played it in the past as an icebreaker, but I'm going to go over it for you now again. So basically how this works is that there are 3 stages. There's the introduction stage where I explain all the rules. And everyone sort of gets an idea of like how much they're going to get paid and what is expected from them. What's a acceptable thing to put in. Then there's the actual gameplay, which consists of 2 separate phases. There's the writing phase where first they have to write their 3 stories, first truth, second truth, and lie. And meanwhile, while they're doing this, unbeknownst to them, I am recording all of their keystrokes and the timestamp of their keystrokes. So this corpus also includes behavioral data. Then after they have finished writing, we go into judgment. Their stories are randomly ordered and shuffled off to a random other player, and they have to figure out which one of these 3 stories is the lie. And if they get it correct, they get a point. And also, if the person that got their stories gets it incorrect, in other words, if they successfully fool someone, they also get a point. And for every point they make, they get more money. And then once all that's done, they go into conclusion, where they find out how much money they get, and they get a link to the survey, and basically the game ends. So here's what each phase looks like. So for the writing phase, we have I gave them a broad topic for each round. This one was homework. In order to give them some direction, because I found a lot of people sort of flail about if they're given no direction, but broad enough so that it wouldn't be overly restrictive. And remember, during all of this, I'm taking their keystrokes and the timestamp of their keystrokes. And after all this is done, we go into judgment phase. This is what it looks like. They're presented with all 3 stories at once, and they get to pick between stories 1, 2, and 3. So here for fun, which one do you think? Put into the chat. Which one you think is the lie? We're looking for the lie.
Yeah, it's not the same one you had in the dry run.
No, it isn't. Too many people saw that. That's what we call cheating. All right, we got some responses in. We had like 10 more seconds for people to guess. So congratulations to everyone who is named Tim. You are the only people to have gotten it correct.
So it's 2, number 2?
No, the only 2 people got the correct story, which is story 1.
Okay.
That's true. I did not save one of my old undergrad tests to give me a confidence boost. In fact, I'm pretty sure I never got a perfect 100 on any engineering test. Those things are hard. But yeah, so this game is rather hard. And then the conclusion screen looks like this. So you get 1 point for every $1 for every point you get. So this is a pretty lucrative game for some people. And then they get to fill out a survey where they told me like, hey, what's your English first language? How old are you? Like various demographic information. And they would also be able to fill in where like Venmo, PayPal, or Zelle, where they get their compensation. So how well did they do overall? And the answer is not well. They got about 35% accurate overall. So the thing is, we already know that humans in general are pretty bad at detecting deceptive text. But how did Bert do? Well, the answer to that really depends on which BERT you choose. There's several different configurations of BERT that I tried out for this, and they have different results. Next slide. There we go. So these are the different configurations of BERT that I went through. So this first one, 3AFC, is what's called 3 alternative force choice. It's the same. That's actually what this task is called, where you have 3 options and you must pick one. So that's actually quite difficult to simulate for a neural network, at least for BERT, because it has only specific ways that it can get input. But how I did it for this one is that I gave it each story in turn and measured the response of its lie classifier. It has 2 classification neurons, and whichever one generated the strongest lie response would be considered to be its choice. So this has so by chance it would get about 33% of the accurate of the time, and it got 41.2% accurate. Next up, we tried something more classic. So this is the binary classification, where I just give it the samples, and one by one it tells me for each one whether it thinks that they are truth or lie, and so that's 50. So that's a 50% chance, and it got 57% chance. So these are not doing super well. They're better than humans, but they're still not great. But these ones are a bit more interesting. So these ones take a bit of explanation. So these are called next sentence prediction models. So here's basically how it works. BERT has this setup called next sentence prediction, where you feed it a context sentence. In this case, I went to the movies last night with my family, and a query sentence. They were showing reruns of the Lord of the Rings. And BERT tries to tell you whether or not the query sentence is the next sentence from the context. So in this case, it probably is. I sort of bastardized this, and for the context, I gave it one true statement from a triplet, and for the query, I gave it one of the other statements in the triplet. So we're going to see whether or not it can tell whether or not the query statement is a lie given some truth. So in this case, the network is cheating a little bit, but it gave me a kind of an interesting result. So there are 2 conditions to this. One's called unshuffled and one's called shuffled. Unshuffled is where I just gave them the triplets whole, unmodified, as they came in from the game. Shuffled is where I shuffled all the stories around, and so none of them actually belonged to the triplets they ended up in. And in the unshuffled condition, it got about almost 80% accurate, which is surprising. And once they were shuffled, only about 56% accurate, the lowest accuracy so far. So BERT, this indicates that BERT was actually able to figure out contextual clues between people in sort of intra-person, that there were individual patterns of deception, but it had trouble generalizing it. Yeah, but regardless, so this is kind of a difficult corpus, but which was sort of the point. They were supposed to be convincing, motivated samples of deception, and now it's time to actually put it to use. So we've examined deceptive text from a purely neural network standpoint to modifying the input. We've taken this new corpus of deceptive data, but we haven't really examined how humans view it. We've gotten their accuracy, but we don't really know how they view it. So that leads us into the third project, human judgment of deception, where I put this onto Mechanical Turk and crowdsource responses. So this is so it looks very similar for the Turkers. It looks very similar to what the subjects did for the making of the corpus, except they don't have to write anything this time, or at least they don't have to generate their own samples. They do still have to write something. In this case, they're getting triplets from this corpus. They have to indicate which one is their choice, and they have to indicate how confident they are in their decision. So choosing from just guessing, somewhat confident, reasonably confident, and certain, also known as confidences 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's also an optional little box here where they get to explain to me why they picked the story that they did. And I did have some requirements because when I first ran this, I had a lot of problem with bots, and I still did, but this lessened them. One, they had to be located in the United States. they had to have done at least 100 hits, which is Mechanical Turk experiments. They had to have had at least a 95% approval rate on those hits, and they weren't allowed to take it twice. No repeats allowed for this time. Another difference between this and the corpus generator is that this time I had attention check questions. So this is a little check against bots and people who just did not care. So these are little triplets, and they were warned about these ahead of time. These are not a surprise. These are triplets where very trivial answers. Like taking 5 seconds to read the question would make this very obvious which answer is false. Hopefully, none of you actually believe that I went back in time to kill the dinosaurs. And if they were, if they get this wrong, then sorry, you're game over for you. We're not wasting any more money on you. So how did these guys do? Also not very good, but a couple of interesting trends. So these guys performed around the level of chance, a little bit worse than our subjects did. But you can see sort of how it tracks with if you bin it by confidence. It trends upward, sort of. There's a lot of noise in it, but as people get more confident in their choices, it does make it a bit more likely for them to be correct. I also track bets on whether or not they gave feedback. And if you're wondering what this tautology is removed thing, what this tautology is removed category is, a surprising amount of responses I got were because it is a lie, which was not helpful. So I decided to see what happens if you took those out. And it turns out the accuracy drops remarkably. But so I have a lot of answers for disparate questions. So what I need to do is find some way to model them and really get something meaningful out of it. So for this, I turn to cultural consensus theory, which you can sort of sum it up as this idea that if you lose the answer key for an exam, and you have just a bunch of the student answers for an exam, you should be able to reconstruct the answer key, or at least the cultural answer key, what people have for their knowledge. So here's sort of how it works. I have a matrix of responses that can take the form of either 1 if the subject respond with the lie, 2 if they respond with the first truth, or 3 if they respond with the second truth. And as a prior, we assume that every subject for every question has uniform likelihood to select all 3. But we need to sort of get a model that simulates what answer are they going to pick. So that depends on this parameter D, which is also called the competence. So the competence depends on 2 variables, theta and delta. Theta refers to the subject's ability. As the subject gets more answers correct, their ability increases. They are more likely to get the correct answer. Delta refers to the item difficulty. As more people miss an answer to this question, that question's difficulty increases. So this D represents the probability that the subject is going to know the culturally correct answer, in this case, the lie. And it goes up with theta and down with delta. So the probability distribution for PY breaks down to probability of getting correct, probably getting Y is D plus getting it randomly. If you don't, in this case, we assume that if you don't know the answer, you guess randomly, uniformly from all 3 options. So D plus 1 minus D over 3, which is the remainder uniform. And for the others, you guess randomly from the rest. So after putting this into the model and getting a response modeled, I wanted to track something called dominance and avoidance. So here's how dominance and avoidance works. Let's say we have 10 people responding to one question. 6 people think that the answer is, 6 people put answer 1, 3 people put answer 2, and 1 person puts answer 3. Answer 1 then would be considered dominant. It is the most selected answer. It is considered to be the one that is perceived as being deceptive. The one that is the least picked, answer 3, is the avoidant answer. It is perceived as being true because no one thinks that it's the lie. So I put this in and I found which stories were dominant and which ones were avoidant. And I also compared it against 100 runs of randomly generated matrix in the same style as the subject matrix to see whether or not this was in fact random. And the answer is they are not random. You can see they are well outside the error for the random runs. So there is definite bias to these answers that it cannot be explained by random chance. So people are latching onto something, but what? So I tried a bunch of different things. I looked at myself. I ran various tests, and I also did an informal survey, as well as looking at the responses of people in the feedback, and asked them, why do you think? What do you think is the difference between these two? And I got some interesting answers. People in my survey said that the dominant sentences were shorter and had worse English. They tended to have simpler sentence structure. And a lot of people noted also that the dominant sentences tend to be more past tense. And that got me thinking. So I decided to track the collocations of I. So for those who are unaware, a collocation is when 2 words or tokens appear next to each other more than you would expect for chance. So in this case, I tracked the collocations between the word I, because all the stories are in first person. I want to know which words appeared near I more often. And I found that they were kind of correct. There were more past tense collocates with I in the dominant than there are in avoidant, particularly the word I was. That appears way more often in dominant than avoidant. I also tracked a special a list of words, and I found that words that are highly negative or very extreme, so words like no, never, not, like the suffix shouldn't and hadn't, and actually appear more in deception, or dominant rather, than avoidant. So what does that indicate? Why would the dominant stories have more instances of I was and no, never, not, and all these past tense collocates than avoidant? Well, when do you use the past tense and things like I was? When you're telling a story. So I decided to test out whether or not the stories were narrative versus being factual. So a narrative story would be you're telling a story about yourself. You're relating something that happened to you or something that you did, versus a factual story where you're just telling something about something about yourself, fait accompli. You're just telling them this straight. So what is the difference between them? Well, 56% of the dominant stories were narrative, and only 35% of the avoidance stories were narrative. So passing a 90% confidence interval, the dominant stories were more likely to be narrative than the avoidance stories, which tend to be more factual. So how do you get away with lying? How do you win your next game of 2 truths and a lie? One, keep your fragments to a minimum and keep your sentence structures more complex. Not try to. It feels weird to say reduce the amount of short sentences you have, but there you go. And definitely avoid bad English or whatever native language you happen to be corresponding in. Stay positive. Those negative words tend to be more indicative of deception, and stick to the facts. turns out telling stories about yourself, even though it's sort of a natural thing to do, might tip someone off that you are being deceptive. In fact, I used these principles when I was writing that triplet earlier. I presented the truthful stories as more past tense stories, and the one lie as something more of a fact about myself in the present. And only 2 people out of this whole audience picked that one. So these principles do work. So overall, what have these projects told us? What have we gotten from them? Well, we've got a new state-of-the-art classification tool, which gives us excellent proof of concept and some trends to look forward to. We got a brand new corpus of realistic deceptive text. And we got a few of the trends that of perceived deception. Are those all the trends of deception? Obviously not. But those were the ones that I was able to identify. I'm sure there's still more, and that corpus is available for the public. I encourage any researcher to give it a try for themselves. Yeah, it's a good start for the future. So big thank you to everyone for coming to my defense. Especially big thank you to my committee, Emery Nefsi, Mark Stivers, and Samir Singh, and to the labs who were foolish enough to host me through my time at UCI, NMI Lab and Mad Lab. Thank you for coming. So thank you for being so patient. Any questions?
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, so I'd like to take questions from the public first before the committee digs in deeper. So anybody not in the committee willing to ask questions, please speak up. Or raise your hand, or
I'll ask one.
go ahead.
So relating to your first project, like the benchmark you're testing on, just curious, like for the language model, is there any like easy augmentation you tried? I know it's like hard to replace word by other stuff. So I don't know if there any data augmentation for the data for the training. Yeah.
No, I didn't modify as far as like just the raw, like the benchmarking. No, I just nothing beyond what I needed to get BERT to understand it, with basically tokenizing it and rendering it into that format that BERT uses. I didn't want to introduce any confounds, so I just took the responses as they were. The most that I did was that for the very small handful of reviews that were too long for BERT has a limit on how many tokens can be submitted at once. I did have to truncate them, but it was a very small percentage that actually overflowed BERT in that manner.
Okay, I guess following that, like the generative model you use, like to the synthetic data set, do you think you can use that as a way like to do data augmentation to, you know, further boost your training results?
Meaning like you use those results as training data?
Yeah, like the one you generated.
In theory, like you could use those as training data once it starts to generate the difference. Mostly what I used them for was as a comparison to the real data, see if the behaviors of what BERT generates and considers to be basically pure deception versus pure truthful, see if those trends were still there. Okay. And I did not train I personally did not train it on those samples, but I did see how it performed on those samples when trained on the real data.
Okay, good.
And Tim Hewitt, I think I saw you raise your hand. Is that right? Yes. Hi, Tim. What is your question?
I realize I should probably know the answer to this one already, but what was the impetus for what inspired you to research this sort of topic? It's really
so that
out of the ordinary is what I mean.
So it's actually it's a little more whimsical than you might expect. So I was sort of like searching for some area that I was interested in, and at the time I was playing a lot of online Mafia. So I don't know if you guys have ever played Mafia, where everyone is sitting around and some people the Mafia, and you have to figure out who's the Mafia before they kill everyone. But I was playing a lot of online Mafia at the time, and I was really, really bad at it. And I was like, man, it would be so nice if I had a network that I could just put in the response and it would tell me who the Mafia is. And that sort of snowballed into, hey, I wonder if anyone's doing this thing where I use neural networks to detect detect deception. And that's when I brought it to Emre.
Cool, thanks. That's awesome.
Okay, I have another question from Jiachuan.
Yeah, hi. And this is just, I guess, for clarification.
Mhm.
So for your last project, when it's about how humans judge deception, so the several things you summarized, like whether you use passive tense or whether it's more factual or narrative. So that's more, you use this sort of to see the difference between dominant and avoidance responses. But these are just sort of like how we humans perceive whether this is a lie, whether
Yes.
this is likely to lie. It's not actually whether it's a lie. Like it's
Correct.
helpful for us to lie to people, but not help us to like necessarily to detect what is a real lie.
That's correct. This project is
Okay.
all about the human perception of text. So in this case, whether or not the dominant versus that's why I call them dominant and avoidant rather than truthful and deceptive, because I only care about what people think is true versus what they think is a lie.
Okay. Yeah, I'd really hope to know a little bit more about the difference between whether you think it's a lie, but it's like whether it's actually a lie, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't the focus of this particular project.
All right. So if there are no other questions from the public, then I'd like to invite the committee members. I'll just start in the order I see the faces. And so, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. You mentioned that some previous work, like on the art corpus, people might not have been very motivated. So you started the motivated deception corpus. But I wonder if you created or used this game that has so many strategies that it's very difficult for people to be above chance. So for example, one strategy is to pick lies that are based on counterfactuals, right? It could have happened. And it's almost impossible to verify if it did happen, let's say, to you. And the other strategy is you pick a truth that's kind of weak, right? So you pick a truth that's that seems very unlikely, but it did happen to you. So I guess, is it possible that in your game that there are all kinds of strategies going on that are hiding the lie, that there might be alternative, let's say, versions of this game that would have led to above chance accuracy for both the humans as well as the model?
That's true. So I actually kind of count on people trying to use some kind of strategy because that means they're putting effort in. But as far as like their specific strategy, some people are definitely going to have some kind of tactic in mind. Like I had the tactic in mind of when making that little triplet of using the things I learned from Project 3. But some people are going to play, especially what I saw a lot of people do is play on like absurdity. In fact, absurdity is one of the things that people seem to think, people seem to respond to in the perceived deception and perceived truth. Some people wrote in the feedback, one of the most common ones after it is a lie is this is just too absurd, too implausible. But so you definitely can in making the lie, definitely go for something that seems absurd, but is actually true, and vice versa. But what I was interested in wasn't really the human accuracy of that. For the corpus generation, I don't really care how accurate the subjects were. I just wanted the data, and I wanted them to put effort into that data. And while they could consciously alter things like, oh, this is very plausible, this is very unlikely. it would be much rarer for them to change what they write linguistically, like put something that that a network would pick up on. That even if they are doing this strategy, that there is still a difference between how they write something true and how they write something that is a lie. And we do in fact the results of the shuffled versus unshuffled do support that different people have different patterns between them on what is true versus lie.
So you think there is some linguistic sort of signature, that is, if you're reading out some counterfactual, you have something in your mind, you know it's a lie, that somehow putting this in words that can produce some signature for other people.
That is sort of what I was looking for. I'm not 100% convinced. And if I'm being honest, there probably isn't like 100% like identifiable marker that like, oh, that this is present in all deceptive text and it's not present in truthful text. That probably doesn't exist, if I'm being honest. But I am pretty sure that there are differences between someone who is writing truthfully and one who is writing deceptively.
One more quick question. And then I should have asked you this question a long time ago. I noticed that there was a clock in your experiment. So people have a certain amount of time to write these stories.
Yes, I in a perfect world, I would have given them all the time in the world, but I had to give them a timer.
That's totally fine. I was wondering, if I'm given very little amount of time, right? If there's some time pressure, I probably would screw up on the lie, because it takes more effort to come up with a lie. And I wonder, have you looked at the time data as a covariate in your analysis?
So I have dived a little bit into the timestamps. So BERT, unfortunately, was not able to tell the difference, or any of the neural networks I tried, but they weren't really able to tell the difference between the different timestamps. I checked, I had this hypothesis that people take longer to start on the lie versus the truth, because they have to spend longer thinking of it. But I wasn't able to prove that with any kind of. I wasn't able to reject the null on that one. There wasn't enough of a difference for me to reject that.
All right, thank you.
That's one of the reasons why I took their keystrokes and their timestamps. Even though I personally don't have a lot of results on that part of it, that data is still there. So if someone can find a pattern in maybe number of deletions, spaces, hesitancies, that data is there.
Thanks.
All right, Samir.
Hi. So yeah, a few questions. You did for the part one, you did some sort of part of speech analysis on the text generated by Grouch, but you also showed us that Grouch text was pretty
Nonsense.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how well the part of speech tags even worked on that setting?
Generally, from what I saw, they were generally pretty accurate. Like a noun is still a noun and a verb is still a verb. There might have been some confusion, like where a few words changed with context, like bank versus bank. But in general, the generated sentences were so very simple, like aliens, crime stellar over and over again, that I don't think it drastically altered what NLTK would do.
I think it kind of depends on what kind of model you end up using. Some models are a little bit more lexicon based, which I imagine will be okay here. But anything that's sort of looking at the sequence of part of speech tags, I expect will perform terribly, because they wouldn't have seen, I don't know, 5 nouns in a row. And predicting that would just be such a low probability thing that they wouldn't predict that, right? So, and I guess what you're looking at mostly is the difference between the truthful and the deceptive ones.
Yeah.
But
part one was also just like the just establishing that there was definite differences between truth and lie. And what I consider probably the most important result of that, rather than the part of speech, is that the discriminator was able to tell so strongly the difference between generated deception and generated truth.
Yeah, I mean, sure. But I think that also means that the GAN hasn't converged in some sense, right? The discriminator is not supposed to be able to tell the difference if the GAN has converged.
No. I don't mean tell the difference between the generated and the truthful. I mean, if you put the generated truthful and the generated deceptive as two different classes, it can tell the difference between each class.
Yeah.
Not the discriminator that's been trained, you mean? So another discriminator that's been trained.
The original discriminator. Sorry,
there's a lot. I see the frozen bird or whatever. Yeah, the bird discriminator. Okay, all right.
Yes, sorry. There's a lot of different models going around.
Okay. I guess let's talk more about the newer stuff. So you're looking at differences between dominant and avoidant. Did you try to train a classifier to differentiate between them?
I did. It got about 56% accurate.
I see. So I guess my general concern is that you're making a lot of conclusions on the dominant avoidant side. And I guess at some point missing how large of a support you have to make those claims. But I also didn't see much statistical significance in that section. And the stuff that I saw, like the mutual information, your mutual informations were getting pretty close in both the columns. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, how supported are those conclusions? What do you think of that? Yeah.
Okay. So when I tested the mutual informations versus against randomly selected stories, and I found that the mutual information in the dominant for the things for especially I was is much larger than I would expect from a randomly selected stories from the corpus. And as far as the narrative versus factual, I ran that through confidence interval testing and came out of that with it passes at least 90% confidence that they're different, that the dominant is more like is more narrative than the avoidant. Same with those negative extreme words, though, that passed also 90% confidence interval.
Okay, yeah. I guess like some of Mark's concerns are sort of at the forefront of my head, is like, what does a lie even mean in this situation, and how much of the information is linguistic versus how much of the information is just, hey, it didn't happen to me. I was hit by a red car instead of a blue car, and then both of them are equally likely, but one of them is a lie because it didn't happen to me. And some of the conclusions that you're deriving might be specific to the setup of two truths and a lie rather than a setup of generating deception, right? So if you were forced to say like, hey, you have to generate a deception about a specific interaction or a specific, structure of a story, I could see,
yeah. That is sort of an issue that that this corpus is set up in a particular way, and it's not there's as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a lot of different types of deceptive text. Like there's fake news, and there's fake reviews, and there's fake social media. So personally, I consider this corpus to be there's no one corpus that can generalize to every type. So this is what I would consider to be something more social, like along the lines of social media or forums, like Reddit, rather than something like a review, which tends to be a bit more technical and tends to be a bit more narrative in general. That's also why I sort of looked for. I wanted to keep my conclusions as broad as possible. So it's true. So at least in this social context, a narrative seems to make it less believable. That might or might not be the case for like a fake news article, even though there are definite similarities between fake news and this, or review. But I'm not going. I'm still going to put my conclusions out there for this text, for this type of text. And I think some of the things that I uncovered are still pretty broadly applicable. Like I think the like about the simple sentence structure and sentence fragments are pretty broadly applicable. That was something that a lot of people seem to think very strongly was deceptive. I think whether or not something is positive versus negative is pretty broadly applicable. But yeah, these should be taken with a grain of salt. That sort of by design, by necessity, that it has to be on this area and generalize it at risk.
So is there a way to think about testing this hypothesis on the deception corpus, like this narrative versus factual stuff? Do you think there's a way to say, like, look, we came with this conclusion, and if we test it on deception text, it turns out most of the fake ones are actually more narrative. Yeah.
So you could in theory do that on the deceptive corpus. It's a lot. I didn't do it because it's a lot to do it on, much more than the. But you would need someone, or I don't know how you would automatically do it, but you would need someone to go through each sample, maybe multiple people if you're concerned about. If you're especially concerned about consistency, and see, check whether each one is more narrative or more factual, and see whether or not such a disparity exists.
That's all I have. Yeah.
Okay. So just following up on that, then, did I understand you correctly? So this factual versus narrative is something that you basically labeled yourself?
Yeah, there was really no way around it. So I put all the stories up there in a list, and I went through it, and I labeled them as narrative or factual, and then I aggregated them, and I checked to see the proportions, and the rest is history.
Okay. So I just had two very quick questions. One is, so you were looking at this next sentence prediction task, and observing how the BERT solves this. Did you also try this I can't remember if you tried this on humans. Do you have a baseline?
What do you mean by trying it on humans?
So the human basically saw doing the next prediction task.
No, I did not have humans do that task. I think that would have required a whole experiment on its own with an IRB thing. And I just didn't have the wherewithal for that. Yeah, I have the human accuracy from the game. But yeah, they did not do anything close to that task. And to have them do that, yeah, that's fine. Sorry, rambling.
Okay, so the other question I had, this is a little bit more general. So you end up your talk with, so how can you get better at lying? Well, can you turn this around and say, how can you get better at detecting lies?
So the third project can't really help with that, because it's not about what is a lie versus isn't a lie. It's about perceived truth versus perceived lie. So that would be, in terms of the results with project 3, it would be more about observing your own behavior. You can sort of tell, assuming that someone isn't like explicitly using these results the way I did in that triplet, you could see at least what people think of as lie versus truth. So you see, so you can be watchful for those patterns and understand. And it might not. There's not gonna be one rule that tells you this is a lie versus this isn't a lie, but you can definitely be aware of your own biases and try to not let that affect you so much.
Okay. One other last question I have, which is, so if you, okay, can I put this? So what do you think would be the best next step in this research? I wanted to say something like, assume you had one other year, what would you do? but you know, if another student comes in, so what should that person focus on?
Ooh, good question. Let me think. What would I do if I did a fourth project?
And you have to answer truthfully there.
I've lied about 6 things in this whole presentation. See if you can figure out which ones. So if we're still keeping in the theme of the lie versus text, I would like to just sort of unrelated go back to the behavioral data. Try and give that another stab. See what patterns I can derive from that with machine learning. Maybe using some of the techniques that I've learned since then.
You mean the typing?
Yes, yeah, the keystrokes. As far as that, like I would like to sort of bring it. Maybe a training exercise, like have people like look at deceptive text and see how maybe like see how they improve with practice. See maybe even like see like what they do at the beginning versus what they do at the end. Like if they get better and if they do get better, like how does their judgment change?
Okay. All right then. So those are all my questions. If there are no other questions, Dan, so can you create a breakout room for the 3 of us? So we'll go there, and then when we're done, we'll come back.
Absolutely. I'll just stop share. No, stop share.
And so Samir and Mark, we just have to click on join, I guess, when that.
As soon as there we go. Breakout rooms. Create one breakout. Assign Emre, Mark, and Samir. Open all rooms. So that's all right. That should be up for you.
Okay. Yep. See you in a bit.
Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Hey, team. Hey, Dan. Very, very impressive. Very
Thank you.
enjoyable.
Thank you. I'm
And
glad.
that's no lie.
Yay, Dan! Woo!
Go Dan.
And we're all here at the same
Yes,
computer, so we're all.
I'm lurking, but nobody can see me, which is so unfortunate.
Good job, Dan. That was really interesting.
Thank you. I'm glad people had fun. It's
So
recording.
the tool be used to get past those tricky door guards in which one always lies.
If you run out of logic traps, yeah.
Excellent.